They say money can buy silence, but it cannot silence a woman whose heart has been broken. On a cold morning in March, in a house too large for one soul, a pregnant woman stood alone, abandoned by the man who once promised her forever. He was a billionaire. She was his wife. And while she carried his unborn child, he boarded a plane, crossed the ocean, and married another woman. What happened when he finally returned was not revenge. It was judgment. Stay with me, because this story does not end the way you think. Why would a man with everything abandon a pregnant wife? What kind of woman waits in silence instead of fighting? And when fate finally speaks, who pays the highest price? Was it love? Was it greed? Or was it destiny sharpening its blade quietly? By the end of this story, one truth will be clear: some doors close softly so that judgment can enter loudly. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before betrayal had a name, before silence filled the halls of that mansion, there was Eleanor Whitman. She was not born into wealth. She was born into grace. Eleanor met Richard Whitman in 1998 at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. He was 26, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night. She was 23, a teacher with student loans and a studio apartment that smelled like vanilla candles and old books. He was ambitious, restless, hungry for something bigger. She believed in him when banks laughed at him. She stood beside him when deals collapsed. She even sold her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing she owned, to help him start his first tech consulting company. And when success finally came, it came because she stayed. They married quietly in 2001. No cameras. No magazines. Just promises spoken in a courthouse with 2 witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple white dress she'd bought on sale. Richard held her hands and said, "You're the reason I'll make it." And for a while, he kept that promise. The company grew. The money followed. They bought their first house, then a bigger one, then the mansion. But the distance grew faster than the fortune. Board meetings replaced dinners. Private flights replaced hand-holding. Charity galas replaced quiet nights on the couch. Richard was always somewhere else, always chasing the next deal, the next headline, the next billion. And Eleanor, she stayed home, waiting. By 2015, Richard Whitman was worth over $2 billion. His face was on magazine covers. His name was mentioned in business schools. He spoke at conferences in Dubai, London, Singapore. Eleanor attended some events, smiling for cameras, shaking hands with people who looked through her like glass. But mostly she stayed home. She redecorated rooms no one used. She hosted dinners for Richard's business partners who barely spoke to her. She learned to sleep alone in a bed built for 2. And then, in January 2016, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She took 3 tests to be sure. She cried in the bathroom, not from sadness, but from hope. Maybe this would bring him back. Maybe a child would remind him of what mattered. She planned to tell him over dinner. She even cooked his favorite meal, pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes, the kind she used to make in their tiny first apartment. She lit candles. She set the table. She waited. 7 o'clock became 8. 8 became 9. At 10:30, she blew out the candles and put the food away. Richard never came home that night. He did not call. He did not text. And when he finally walked through the door 3 days later, he barely looked at her. He smelled like expensive perfume that was not hers. His eyes were distant, like he was looking at a stranger. Eleanor wanted to tell him about the baby, but something in his coldness stopped her. She waited for the right moment. That moment never came. 2 weeks later, the message arrived. Not a call. Not a face-to-face conversation. An email. Sent at 2:47 in the morning. The subject line was blank. The message read, "Eleanor, I need space. I've met someone abroad. I'm starting a new chapter. My lawyer will contact you regarding arrangements." 23 words. That is all their 17 years together were worth. 23 cold, clinical words. Eleanor reread it until the letters blurred. Her hands shook. Not from anger, not yet. But from disbelief. She called him. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a text. I'm pregnant. It showed as read. No response. Days turned into a week. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Then the headlines broke. It was everywhere. Business Insider. Forbes. Page 6. Billionaire Richard Whitman marries European socialite in private Monaco ceremony. There were photos. Richard in a tailored tuxedo, smiling wider than Eleanor had seen in years. Beside him, a woman named Isabelle Laurent, a French model and socialite, 28 years old, with long dark hair and a diamond necklace that could buy a house. The wedding had happened 4 days after his email to Eleanor. 4 days. Their marriage was not even legally dissolved yet. Eleanor sat on the kitchen floor, phone in hand, and felt something inside her crack. Not her heart. Her heart was already broken. It was her understanding of reality. How does a man you loved, you sacrificed for, you believed in, become a stranger capable of this? Friends started calling. Some with sympathy. Some with gossip disguised as concern. Did you know? How are you holding up? What are you going to do? Eleanor stopped answering. Family came by. Her mother cried. Her father wanted to call a lawyer, to fight, to expose Richard publicly. But Eleanor said no. She did not want war. She did not want headlines. She wanted peace. And she wanted to protect the life growing inside her. The world could celebrate Richard's new love story. She would focus on her child. Alone. But here is what Eleanor did not know yet. Fate was already writing a different ending. And Richard's choices were about to cost him everything he thought mattered. Can you imagine that? 17 years of marriage erased with an email. Replaced with a stranger in less than a week. How would you feel if the person you sacrificed everything for did this to you? Would you fight? Would you retreat? Would you burn it all down or walk away quietly? Think about that. Because Eleanor's choice would define everything that came next. Pregnancy was not gentle to Eleanor. Morning sickness started in her 6th week and never really stopped. She lost weight instead of gaining it. Her doctor put her on bed rest twice. The mansion, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a prison. Every room echoed with memories she wished she could forget. The nursery she had started to plan remained empty. Richard's lawyer contacted her once. The message was clear: sign the divorce papers, accept the settlement, stay quiet. The offer was $2 million. It sounded like a lot until you realized Richard was worth over $2 billion. It was hush money. It was the price of her silence, her dignity, her 17 years. Eleanor did not sign. Not because she wanted more money, but because she refused to be erased. Weeks turned into months. The world moved on. Richard and Isabelle were photographed in Paris, in the Maldives, on a yacht in the Mediterranean. They were the golden couple. Perfect. Untouchable. Meanwhile, Eleanor's belly grew. She attended doctor's appointments alone. She assembled the crib alone. She cried alone at 3 a.m. when the baby kicked and she had no one to share it with. Friends slowly disappeared. Some said she was too depressing to be around. Others did not know what to say. Her family tried, but they had their own lives, their own problems. Eleanor learned a hard truth during those months: abandonment does not just come from the person who leaves. It comes from everyone who watches you suffer and says nothing. In her 7th month, something shifted. Eleanor was sitting in the nursery, folding tiny clothes she had bought herself, when a thought came to her clearly: she could not raise her son in this house. This house was Richard's dream, Richard's trophy, Richard's ghost. She needed to start over. Completely. So she made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She put the mansion on the market. She sold it within 3 weeks for $4.7 million. She took that money, packed 2 suitcases, and moved 6 hours away to a small town in Vermont called Maplewood. Population 3,200. No one there knew who Richard Whitman was. No one cared. And that was exactly what Eleanor needed. She bought a small 2-bedroom house near a lake. It had creaky floors and old windows, but it had something the mansion never did. It felt like home. She changed her last name legally, back to her maiden name, Carter. Eleanor Carter. It felt like shedding skin. Like becoming herself again. In September 2016, her son was born. 7 pounds 3 ounces. Blue eyes. A soft cry that sounded like music. She held him in the hospital room, just the two of them, and whispered, "Your name is Samuel. It means God has heard. Because even when no one else was listening, you were heard. You were wanted. You were loved." And in that moment, Eleanor made a vow. She would raise Samuel to be nothing like his father. Years passed quietly in Maplewood. Eleanor got a job at the local library. It did not pay much, but it was peaceful. She read to children on Saturday mornings. She made friends with neighbors who brought casseroles and did not ask invasive questions. Samuel grew. He was curious, intelligent, kind in ways that seemed rare. He loved books, just like his mother. He asked questions about everything: why the sky changed colors, why leaves fell, why people were sometimes sad. Eleanor answered every question with patience. She never spoke badly about Richard, even though Samuel eventually asked, "Where's my dad?" She simply said, "He made choices that took him far away. But you and I, we have everything we need right here." And Samuel, wise beyond his years, seemed to understand. But Eleanor did something else during those years. Something no one expected. She started investing. She had learned a lot during her years with Richard, watching him build his empire, listening to his business calls, reading the contracts he left on the kitchen table. She took the money from the mansion's sale and started small. Index funds, dividend stocks, real estate in growing markets. She was careful, strategic, patient. She did not want wealth for luxury. She wanted security for Samuel. She wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, her son would never be at the mercy of a man like Richard. By the time Samuel turned 5, Eleanor had turned 4.7 million into almost 8 million. She was not a billionaire, but she was free. Truly free. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Richard Whitman's life was unraveling. Isabel, the woman he had married so impulsively, loved the idea of Richard more than the man. She loved the yachts, the parties, the diamonds. But when the business started struggling, when Richard's health began declining from stress and poor choices, Isabel's affection cooled quickly. By 2019, Richard had been sued twice by former business partners. His company lost a major contract worth hundreds of millions. His board of directors started questioning his judgment. And Isabel, who had promised to stand by him, was photographed in Monaco with a younger tech entrepreneur. The headlines that once celebrated Richard now mocked him. Billionaire's fortune and marriage crumble simultaneously. Karma, people said, has perfect timing. Richard's wake-up call came in a hospital in London in late 2020. He had collapsed during a business meeting. Exhaustion. High blood pressure. Early signs of a heart condition. Lying in that sterile room, alone because Isabel was traveling, Richard asked himself a question he had avoided for years. Where is my son? He had never met Samuel. Never sent a birthday card. Never asked for a photo. He had buried the guilt under work, under distractions, under a new life that was now falling apart. But guilt, Richard learned, does not stay buried forever. It waits. And when everything else is stripped away, it is all that remains. He hired a private investigator. It took 3 weeks to find Eleanor. When Richard learned she was living in a small Vermont town, working at a library, raising Samuel alone, something inside him broke. Not his pride. His illusion. He had told himself Eleanor was fine, that she had taken the money and moved on, that she did not need him. But the investigator's report was clear. Eleanor had not taken his settlement. She had rebuilt her life from scratch. And Samuel, his son, had grown up without him by choice, not circumstance. Richard realized then that he had not just lost a wife. He had lost the only person who had ever truly loved him. And he had thrown it away for what? A woman who left him the moment the money slowed. A life that looked perfect in photos but felt empty in reality. In the spring of 2021, Richard returned to the United States. Not as the triumphant billionaire, but as a man carrying the weight of his mistakes. He did not call ahead. He did not send a message. He simply showed up in Maplewood, standing outside Eleanor's small house, unsure if he even had the right to knock. When Eleanor opened the door and saw him, she did not cry. She did not yell. She simply looked at him, older now, grayer, tired, and said, "You should not be here, Richard." Her voice was calm. Steady. It was the voice of someone who had already done the hard work of healing. Richard asked if he could meet Samuel. Eleanor hesitated. Not because she wanted to punish Richard, but because she wanted to protect her son. She told Richard, "You can meet him. But you do not get to disrupt his life. You do not get to make promises you will not keep. And you do not get to rewrite history." Richard agreed. That afternoon, Eleanor introduced Samuel to his father. Samuel was polite, curious, but not needy. He shook Richard's hand and said, "Mom told me about you. You're the man who left." Richard felt those words like a knife. Not angry words. Just truth. Simple, childlike truth. They spent an hour together. Richard tried to explain, to apologize, to justify. But Samuel, only 5 years old, said something that stopped him cold. "Did you ever love my mom?" Richard opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. Because the truth was complicated, painful, and undeniable. He had loved Eleanor. But he had loved success more. And that choice had cost him everything. Then came the moment that changed everything. Richard, trying to reconnect, trying to prove he still had worth, mentioned that he was trying to rebuild his company, that he was looking for investors, that he wanted to make things right. Eleanor, who had been silent, finally spoke. "You mean the Whitman Capital Group?" Richard nodded, surprised she knew the name. Eleanor reached for her laptop, opened a file, and turned the screen toward him. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm one of your investors." Richard's face went pale. Eleanor explained calmly. 3 years earlier, when Richard's company went public to raise emergency capital, Eleanor had quietly purchased shares. Not a controlling stake, but enough. Enough that when combined with other minority investors she had networked with, Samuel, through a trust Eleanor had established, now held significant influence in the company's future. Richard stared at the documents, his hands trembling. The son he abandoned now had a say in the empire he built. Not through revenge. Not through court battles. But through Eleanor's quiet, strategic brilliance. She had protected Samuel's future by securing a piece of the very thing Richard had chosen over them. Richard looked up at Eleanor, and for the first time in years, he saw her clearly. Not as the woman he had left behind, but as the woman who had outsmarted him, outworked him, and outloved him in every possible way. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you invest in my company after what I did?" Eleanor's answer was simple. "Not for you, Richard. For Samuel. So that one day, when he's old enough, he'll have choices. Real choices. Not the kind you made." That meeting ended quietly. Richard left Maplewood, but he did not disappear. Over the following months, he tried to be present in Samuel's life. Not as a father, he had lost that right, but as someone who wanted to make amends. He sent letters. He video called on birthdays. He set up a college fund. But Eleanor set firm boundaries. Samuel would know his father, but Richard would not get to play hero. Samuel would decide, when he was older, what kind of relationship he wanted. And Eleanor would not stand in the way, but she would not enable fantasies either. Richard accepted this. He had no choice. His second marriage to Isabel officially ended in 2022. She took millions in the divorce. Richard's company stabilized but never returned to its former glory. He aged quickly, the weight of his choices visible in every line on his face. By 2023, Samuel was 7 years old. Bright, compassionate, grounded. One evening, Eleanor and Samuel were sitting by the lake behind their house, watching the sun set. Samuel asked, "Mom, do you think Dad's a bad person?" Eleanor thought carefully before answering. "No, sweetheart. I think he's a person who made bad choices. There's a difference. Bad choices do not make you bad. But they do have consequences. And sometimes those consequences last a lifetime." Samuel nodded, then asked, "Do you forgive him?" Eleanor smiled softly. "I forgave him a long time ago. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness is not about the other person, Samuel. It is about freeing yourself." Samuel hugged his mother tightly and whispered, "I'm glad I have you." What Richard never understood, until it was too late, is that success without character is the poorest kind of wealth. He built an empire but lost a kingdom. He gained the world but lost his soul. And the woman he abandoned became the architect of her own peace, her own power, her own legacy. Eleanor never remarried. She did not need to. Her life was full. Full of purpose, love, quiet joy. She taught Samuel that love is not about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It is about showing up. It is about staying. It is about choosing someone every single day, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. And Samuel, growing up watching his mother's strength, learned what it meant to be a man of integrity. Not from his father's success, but from his mother's resilience. Now let me ask you something. What would you have done in Eleanor's place? Would you have fought publicly, exposed Richard, taken him for everything he had? Or would you have walked away quietly, rebuilt in silence, and let your success speak louder than any revenge? Do you believe people like Richard ever truly change, or do they just learn to live with regret? And if you were Samuel, could you forgive a father who chose money and another woman over you before you were even born? These are not easy questions. But they are real. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you stand. Because stories like this are not just about other people. They are mirrors. They ask us who we would be when tested, when betrayed, when left alone. Here is the truth that Eleanor learned and that Richard never did. Not every abandonment is rejection. Some are divine redirection. Some closed doors are blessings in disguise. Richard thought leaving Eleanor would lead to freedom, happiness, a better life. Instead, it led to emptiness, regret, and the slow realization that he had already had everything he needed and threw it away. Eleanor, on the other hand, thought being abandoned was the end of her story. But it was actually the beginning. The beginning of her strength. Her independence. Her legacy. She did not need a billionaire to validate her worth. She found it within herself. And she passed that lesson on to her son, which is the greatest inheritance anyone can leave. Today, Eleanor still lives in Maplewood. She is in her late 40s now, content, surrounded by a community that loves her. Samuel is thriving in school, excelling in math and literature, dreaming of becoming an engineer or a writer. He has not decided yet. Richard is still alive, still wealthy on paper, but undeniably alone. He sees Samuel twice a year, supervised visits that are polite but distant. And every time he looks at his son, he sees the ghost of what he could have had. A family. A home. A love that was unconditional. But ghosts cannot be held. They can only haunt. And Richard will spend the rest of his life haunted by the choice he made on that cold day when he sent a 23-word email and walked away from everything that mattered. So what is the lesson here? Is it that karma always wins? Maybe. Is it that money cannot buy happiness? Possibly. Or is it something deeper? Maybe the lesson is this: the people we abandon do not stop existing. They do not disappear. They rebuild. They grow. They become stronger in our absence. And sometimes the life they build without us is so beautiful, so whole, that our return is not welcomed as rescue but tolerated as courtesy. Richard returned expecting gratitude, maybe even a second chance. What he found was a woman who had already moved on and a son who did not need him. That is not revenge. That is consequence. That is life balancing its own scales quietly, perfectly, inevitably. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of your own life or someone you know, do not keep it to yourself. Share it. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because we bring you stories that do more than entertain. They awaken. They challenge. They remind you that life is not about what happens to you, but about how you rise after the fall. Eleanor rose. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. And in her rising, she taught her son, and now all of us, that grace under pressure is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next story. And remember, some doors close softly so that better ones can open loudly. Choose wisely who you walk away from. Because one day, you might realize they were the door you should have walked through.